is hooks. Ta-da! So what are hooks? We've heard hooks, we've seen hooks. Hooks are a really brand new cool thing. Hooks. They're new as of React 16.8, which went live in production March, the other M1, March. So this is really new. This is a really new idea and a really new concept. And what they do, hooks allow us to kind of use state inside of React without having to use classes, right? We've kind of said components are classes, classes are objects, objects have properties and methods, all this whole big shebang. But really, wouldn't it be cool if we could use React without having to know about the whole big shebang? Right? Like, what if we didn't care what the class was? That'd be awesome. Right, Dante?
So what, you mean that state is global?
Nope. So instead of elevating state globally, the idea for hooks is that now we're actually going to break up our state into a whole bunch of mini states almost. So we don't have this whole bunch of mini states. But before we can talk and really dive deep into hooks, let's chat about destructuring. Hey, great segue, right? So in JavaScript, if we wanted to get the first and the second item of an array, we'd have to do something like this, right? Const first and second equals array 0. But really, what we can do, we can use a destructuring syntax. We saw this a little bit with objects, right? Whenever Brad posted the code last week, we kind of dove into it a little bit. And what this allows us to go into existing data structures, either objects or arrays, and kind of pluck out values that we need. In this morning's Code Wars, we saw, we actually wanted everything. So we used the ... syntax. But if we just want the first and second item of an array, we're just going to say, hey, const, square brackets, bless you twice, give variable name, square bracket, equals that array. And it's going to pluck out the first element and the second element and put it into these two values. Feeling good so far? Nothing too crazy, right? Just like how last week we had const squiggles is logged in equals this dot state, right? And we're plucking out just that thing called is logged in. We're plucking out, give me the first and give me the second thing. So here, this will print out 10, this will print out 12. All right, bonus question. We know what first and second will equal. How about the rest? What is the rest? What is the value of the rest?
Is it everything you haven't pulled out already?
Yep, it's 13 and 14. It's actually an array. We're saying, hey, anything that's after this, just put it into this array. Yeah, so we can destructure stuff inside of a destructure. Feel okay? This actually shouldn't be that groundbreaking because we have already talked about this just a wee bit. Dante?
So the rest is going to be an array of 2
Yep.
numbers.
Yep. Just to kind of see that, let's pop this into our terminal real fast. Node. So if we had const r equals 10, 12, 13, 14, right? So we have r. If we do const first, second, and ... the rest equals r. Aha. First is 10, second will be 12, and the rest, it's an array of 13, 14. And what's cool, r is untouched.
Cool.
Yeah. So then we can kind of slice up our arrays in kind of a different manner.
So that means that we can just pull that out, put them in the variables in the structure that we need to
Yep.
do whatever we need to do without having to really deal with the array correctly.
Yeah. So let's kind of put this in a box and put it on the shelf. We'll come back to it in about 5 minutes. Because also a big part of hooks, you notice is that there's no classes, right? So, all right, so now our components no longer need to be classes. They can be, if we want them to be, but really, they can be something called functional components as well. So, this is what we're used to, right? Hello, class hello message extends React component, render, return, blah, right? We've seen this pattern a lot. We might have a component did mount in there, we might have a couple of other function stuff in there, but really, we have an object that has some methods on it that update state. Well, that's fine and dandy. But for something like this that doesn't have a state, this could be a lot simpler. Because really, the only thing that we care about is this right here, right? Give me some JSX that has the props of whatever the name is that was passed to and displayed on the screen. Nothing too crazy, right? All that other shenanigans is just shenanigans. Function components allow us to take that core logic, rip it out of a class, and plop it right into a function. So it's a little bit different, a little bit lighter, less words, less things to worry about. This feels better. It's taken the complexity of object-oriented programming, kind of booted it to the curb and said, you know what? What you care about here is just taking and returning, creating this JSX, and that's it. So like last week when we were working on Star Wars, right? We had a lot of really simple components that didn't have state, that just kind of manipulated how it was displayed and stuff like that. Well, that manipulation really is just a function at its core. Given this input, do this logic, give me this output. That's not really object-oriented programming. That's more functional programming, right? So this kind of melds into that. There's a lot of functions, a lot of components, and we'll go back and refactor them. We'll refactor them away from our classes into this functional approach. Benefits, less complicated. You know, it's, right?
Yeah.
Whew, a lot less complicated. It's a lot more straightforward. They're smaller, they're lighter, they're also faster, which is a really good added bonus. But yeah, how's that feel? Cool. So yeah, these are really much the benefits. Simpler, things are just functions. Easier to deal with scope and state. There's no like weird race conditions, there's no weird lifecycle events. It's just kind of, well, given these props, let's render out this code. Classes are hard for everybody. I mentioned this whenever we started OOP. No one does it right, but everyone does it. It's true. And until March, you couldn't use state, which is actually a downside. Because until March, all your functions were really just kind of like one-way read-only things. But hooks, Rufios, hooks allow us to give us the ability to use. Yeah, she's been sending me stuff with like Rufio for the past 10 minutes. So, Rufio. So hooks give us the ability to use state inside of our functional components. Now our functional components have a little bit of life to them. And they do that not by saying, hey, I'm going to elevate state. They're saying, I'm going to take state and break it down into little mini states. Now we only need to track what we need to track, and that's it. Because I'm sure as you found so far, like your state and your component just kind of becomes like a dumpster fire of like everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Immediate agreement right here. Like immediate. So you've seen this pain, right? Where it's like, oh, I know now. My state starts off with nice and clean, one thing in the states. Well, now I also got to track, you
And then
know,
it's four things.
my error message. Oh, now I got to track my random movie. Oh, now I got to track my title. Oh, now I got to track what's out when I'm showing on the screen. I got to track what page I'm on. I got to track what's my total run count. I got to track how I'm like. It blows up really fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
This says instead of having that blowing up, let's actually make it smaller and actually let's control it a little bit better. So without hooks, if we just want to do a simple counter like we did on day one, click, click, click up, click, click, click down, like for a scoreboard, you know, we'd have something like this, right? I mean, we've all seen this. I'm not going to work through this code, but it's like we have a method that acts on state, that we have buttons that call set count, blah, blah, blah. Here we are. Now with that, notice it scrolls off the page.
Yes.
This one doesn't. So now our code is there's less code. but it's doing more. This is our first real exposure to hooks. Woo, yeah, right? It's just a function, because it is. You notice hooks are actually the second line. That's the new thing here. Where we say, hey, const count comma set count equals use state 0. So that's saying, hey, I want to track something inside of my state, inside of my hook state, my new state. But I only want to, I'm going to store the value of it right here. And instead of this dot set state to kind of just blanket update everything, I'm going to give you a function to update just count. So this function is only used to update count. So if we had like 5 different variables, each one would have their own separate update functions. And you notice it's the destructuring syntax because use state returns an array. Returns an array of 2 things, its current value and a function to update it. And that 0 that we pass it,
Is the count.
that's the initial value. So this thing's starting at 0. And for me to use it, for me to access it down here in my code,
Count.
the exact same way, right? Is inside of JSX. We use our squiggles to say that we're in JavaScript. But you notice what's missing here, right? This dot state, dot blah. This dot props, this dot state, this dot state, this dot state, this dot state.
Where's this?
Gone.
Well, we just got it.
Yeah.
Alright, buy this. I liked this.
I enjoy this too. But so, fun fact, you could use this here, but you don't have to. And I would actually recommend not using this, because you don't need it.
It's just extra.
Yeah,
It's like over.
it's fluff. It's
Are
fluff.
you-
Probably. I hope I hit record.
Oh,
I did hit record.
that's good.
Need your red dot now.
Yes.
It doesn't even sit track.
Hector and the man.
If you have so let's say a company doesn't have hooks.
Yep.
They want to be like, hey, can you start adding hooks?
Yep. 100% backwards compatible.
100% call.
Yes, you can have functional components and class components in the exact same project, as long as React is over version 16.8.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that's what a lot of companies are doing. They're like, this thing is bananas. I want to start using this so much more.
And it makes it faster.
But I don't want to rewrite my entire code base. So all my legacy stuff, I'm still there. But as soon as we go to update a bug fix or to create new development, hey, use hooks instead.
That's cool.
So because we can now slowly increment and slowly update our code base to being a really cool new thing. Amanda.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I need to walk through this.
Yeah, we haven't actually walked through it yet, so.
Okay, well then I will
No.
wait for my question until after we do that.
You sure? Okay,
No.
cool.
But yes.
So we said, hey, you know what? The thing we're tracking, the thing that's changing is count.
Right.
Right? Now, I want to display it here. In order for me to update it, on my reset button, I'm just saying, hey, whenever I click this, run set count with 0. That's it. This looks very familiar, right?
And so much easier.
Yeah.
So much easier.
Because odds are, as we saw in the previous example, we're going to have a set count function anyways,
Yeah.
right? Like, we look at this now and we see where this pattern comes from, right? We're tracking one thing, so we're putting it in state, and we have some function somewhere that says, hey, update this thing in state for us. So it's a very manual process. This pattern of we have something in state, now we have a function to update state was very common and very popular, of course, very natural almost. It's like, well, you know, let's package this up, and let's provide you with it. Because they're all going to be the same thing, right? A function that takes a parameter of the new value, and then we update the exact same thing in state. You know, it's not groundbreaking. I'm sure you're like an update movie function, right? Like, and this is what it would do, is that we're saying, hey, set count. This one's different. Ooh. What's going on here? All this is saying, so set count takes the new value here, but set count also takes a function.
That's what it's called.
Yes.
Okay.
And all that function does, that's a function that says, hey, take the last value and compute something for the next state. So I'm telling it how to compute the next one. Yeah, right here, right? Take the previous count and add 1 to it. Take the previous count and subtract 1 to it. So now I'm putting in my how does my state change logic into these functions.
How can we see the other codes to that?
Yeah.
So it removes the need for anonymous functions.
It actually embraces anonymous functions. Because now everything is just kind of like, hey, we're just kind of here. Like, we don't need to define a set count function somewhere. We are using it here.
Her current count is count. How are you updating count? Because it's the X parameter.
Yep. So whenever these set counts are called,
Mhm.
right here, and here, whenever this thing is called, whenever this thing is invoked, it's actually going to rerun the function.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So count is we're only gonna use count when we want to display. We're only using count when we're displaying.
Yep.
And then we are on the functions. We're working directly in set count for each one.
Yep.
And on the on-click where you have the pref count, the first pref count, that's just a variable that we create. We say, okay, we're passing, update this variable by 1 when we do the add. Okay.
I don't see how count is being updated.
That's what's happening right here.
So it looks like the set count is being updated there.
So the set count is the function to update the count.
Yes, I guess for me initially, what was confusing was the set count's already a function that we're just calling this built in, right?
Yeah. Like, so useState returns 2 things. It returns the value and also a function to update the value. So the value is count. So I'm plopping it inside a variable called count. Then for me to update it, I need to call set count. Set count's a function.
Right.
And that set count is tied to count. That says, hey, every time set count is called, update the value of count.
Okay, so that function's not on this page.
Right. That function's not built by us. We're just saying, hey, you know what? We're getting it from React.
Is this,
Hector and Will, they kind of both
Go ahead.
at the same time.
I just want to know, is this something that they build from the back end? Right?
Yeah, all front end stuff.
So if I was in Visual Studio, I don't know what the command is where you right click on some command and see if there's more to it. So a set count, I would see it's actually
Yeah. It would actually take us into React, and we'll have some really generic function that says, hey, we have a value here that does something. This would actually be really cool to build something like this, just to kind of track it, because it's really good practice in scope and closures. Not something that I would recommend to do, at least in the next 6 weeks.
So this isn't going to work on its own, like as is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I'm missing an import statement, but that's just like fluff. But yeah, this will work as is.
You could drop this in CodePen and you'd be fine.
Yeah. In fact, that's our next thing we're doing is like we're going to refactor some code. So let's actually put this component on a page and explore hooks a little bit. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
So coming over here,
Wait, so am I missing that like render is now like
render's gone.
kind of dumb?
Not dumb, but just kind of gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So render's gone.
Yeah.
Render's built into this. This is like,
Yeah. Our render is actually the return.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Dante?
Do you have to name a JSX file or?
Nah, you can do this inside of a JS file. Week. Ooh, 6?
Yeah.
What? Diggity dar.
We have our halfway celebrations.
We do. Woot woot. Halfway. Yeah, that's what we're doing for socials is our halfway celebration, which is amazing. It is. It's pretty much a half day off. Like pretty much like after lab time on Friday, you're all free to go. Like there's no huddles, there's no formal socials. It's celebrate halfway your success and everything, however you want to. Probably go out drinking together, but
Would
Do
go
we
home.
have homework that weekend?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was like, please
at least that's not a week outside.
You're never getting
Summer
a
weekend without homework.
I know, but it's my birthday weekend, and I was just thinking, oh, do I actually get to enjoy it?
You can still enjoy it.
Portions of it, yes.
Yeah.
Portions.
I was asking for Joe as well. It's also his birthday.
Oh yeah.
We have 2 birthdays this week.
Same day.
Same day.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that? Actually, pretty high for this
You know
week. Because there's 2 people.
His your birthday. His birthday's on the 29th. Alan is the 22nd.
You know,
I need like a calendar.
yeah, right.
What
It's-
was going on 9 months ago? I'm bored.
It's actually pretty interesting. It's like,
I have a September birthday. There's a lot of September birthdays because of Christmas and New Year's.
yeah,
October's Valentine's Day. Like, there's a lot of fall birthdays, so that's why I was saying what was going on 9 months ago.
yeah. Your conception date's almost more interesting than your birthday.
Yeah.
Just because like I'm December, my sister is also December. Mid-December corresponds with St. Patty's Day. My dad is Irish. You know.
My best friend, her sister, her brother, and I think her mother are all born in October.
Yeah, and there's actually I forget what
January,
the
like,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a phenomenon where it's like if you have a group of people, the odds that someone has the same birthday with you should be very slim, right? 365 days. It's actually not. Once you get to like 10 people, like odds are someone has the same birthday.
It's like the hurricane babies.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that.
Yeah, like last cohort, I had someone, another student had the same birthday as me, and it's like, oh, okay, it was bound to happen eventually, you know. So it's a really interesting thing because it's all about like stats and phenomena and like what happened 9 months ago. It's so super cool. Anywho, here we are.
Now y'all are all really uncomfortable thinking about that.
Thank you.
we are all going. When's my birthday? What's 9 months prior? 9-ish months, give or take a month.
I'm one of 5 girls. I know far too much about
September.
misconception.
I know my
December,
story too.
October.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Happy and good.
All right, so hooks. We want to create a new component. New file. We'll call this counter.js. All right. So I'm not going to RCC because I don't want a React class component. I'm just going to import React from yeah, right. I'm going to import React from React, and if we recall what an RCC looks like,
Oh, we do.
I'm just making sure that we do. We see that hey, we're importing something, blah, we're defining something, and then we're exporting it, right? Now instead of exporting it down here at the bottom, what we're going to do, we're going to say, hey, you know, export default. So export one thing from this file. It's going to be a function. And we're going to call it counter. And this function will actually return some JSX. Then we'll make it hello world. Here's my component. Right? Very. Amanda.
So you would still need to import this component onto your app.js, right?
Correct. Everything else is still the same. This doesn't affect anything above it. So like, there's no need to import this somewhere. We'll still have React Router somewhere in our project. It doesn't affect anything above it. It only really affects things at its own level. Because this functional component can have a child class component as well. They're almost interchangeable. Just the behaviors are a bit different. And of course, the syntax is different. But like, they're pretty much interchangeable. I can make a class called counter, and I should be able to swap these two out without any issues. Phil.
I was just gonna ask, you can still pass props as if
Yep.
it was a class.
Props are passed in a different manner, as we saw on the second example, and we'll get to that in a second. So let's use this, run this, see what it does. There we start. Hello world
Should have 2 hello worlds, right?
from hooks.
Rufio, okay, good.
I think I might have got bamboozled on a project, Mark.
You might go what?
I think I got bamboozled on a project. I think we were told by those developers that we couldn't develop the code because they had no hooks. Couldn't do hooks.
Yeah, if it was in the past like 4 months, yeah, you've probably been bamboozled. Straight up bamboozled. Unless you're on like React like 12 and it doesn't support hooks.
But you don't absolutely have to have hooks. It's just less code, right?
Yeah, you don't need hooks.
What's
my
our
point.
point though?
That being said, there is something called a webhook, which is something completely different.
Okay.
Yeah. Hooks are React. Webhooks are something to do with APIs.
Okay. Never mind.
Yep.
Are we gonna learn webhooks?
I feel better
We
now. I didn't get bamboozled.
You might have, but at least not in this.
Yeah, it was webhooks. It was webhooks.
But definitely make sure you know
The difference.
hooks are not webhooks.
Yes. Webhooks are pretty much events in the web. So like,
that makes sense.
there's
then that's right.
I could tie into a webhook when a Git repository is updated to always put on the latest code and to run the tests.
Okay.
So it's more like an event at a macro level versus hook. So I'm going to import things the exact same way. Import counter from component/counter. And I am going to say, you know what? Give me a counter. All right. I guess you don't see what I see yet. Spoilers, it works. Here we go. The exact same thing. I know, not too crazy. But yeah, you see here, starting off with the app as a class component. Now our functional component is doing the exact same thing. We can actually refactor our app as well if we wanted to be fancy. So export default app. No longer extends components, no longer a render. Export default function app. And it'll still work. Actor.
I went to the restroom, so you might have did this once. Did
We need so much shit for that this weekend.
He has a 4-year-old.
the hooks? Is that something that's already inside of React?
Yeah.
Or something that re-upload now?
Nope, it's already inside of React.
As long as you have
Every
16.8.
Which we do, because we check out the package JSON. We are at 16.8.6. So we are above version 16.8. That's the magic number.
Are you not using arrow functions for everything, or just didn't want to?
Yeah, hooks aren't arrow functions, because there is still a this. And if we recall, arrow functions don't have this, so there is still a this.
Wait, so you couldn't use an arrow function for this app?
Nope. So like, if I wanted to change this, yep,
Why did that?
yep. So it's saying that it's not defined. Hooks don't use arrow functions. To define a hook, you need to use the classic, the more traditional function syntax. I can use arrow functions inside of it.
So with inside,
Yeah.
so inside I can use functions, can't use.
Yeah, so I can be like const sum equals I can still do stuff like that inside of it. But the actual hook itself has to be a more traditional function. How are we feeling?
Do you have to export every function now, or are you just doing that for this one function?
Nope, you have to export every function. and each function gets its own
Its own export default.
file.
Is that taking the place too of the render completely?
Yep.
Like is that packaging it all the
Mhm.
same?
So when we had the individual movies, just, we could have made that into hooks.
So, yes, but there's more to that answer than I'm going to say right now.
Okay.
And with that being said, it's 10:48. 12-minute break. Come back at 11. We'll actually add hooks here. We'll actually add a counter here, and then we'll also try to integrate an API because that's different. Because you notice functions, there's no more component did mount. Our life cycle is different.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Wait.
What?
I thought I was okay, but no component amount.
Component didn't
It's
mount.
gone.
It's gone.
So we just learned this, and we just learned component did down, and they're both gone.
Yes.
To be fair, hooks is so brand new that a lot of places aren't.
And those ideas are still around.
Boy,
Um,
they.
Yeah.
Still alive, you